Way breakdown. Cutting through the spin. Exposing the truth. Liberty Ledger.
Do you love America, Congresswoman? The question cut through the room like a sharpened blade. Speaker Mike Johnson stood high at the rostrum, not down at the witness table. The Speaker's own podium. His Bible and a copy of the Constitution were laid out on the surface right in front of him. His voice remained perfectly calm. There was no anger or aggression, only the heavy weight of moral authority. Ilhan Omar sat below him at the witness table. It was the first time in modern history that a sitting congresswoman had been forced to testify in a public hearing before the House Ethics Committee. Her designer hijab looked flawless. Her expression shifted from defiance to a clear sense of uncertainty. She had successfully navigated many scandals before. Accusations of anti-Semitism, controversial 9/11 comments, and allegations of marriage fraud. The media had always protected her. Her fellow Democrats had always stood by her. Identity politics had always worked in her favor. But this question, this one simple question, was, do you love America? The committee room was packed to capacity. 9/11 families were seated in the very first row. Holocaust survivors sat right next to them. Somali-American refugees wore American flag pins as the cameras rolled and the entire nation watched. Omar opened her mouth, closed it, started to speak, then stopped. Of course, Yes or no, Congresswoman? Johnson's voice stayed soft and patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to answer a basic question. Do you love America? The silence dragged on. 2 seconds passed, then 5, then 10. It's not that simple. Actually, it is that simple. Johnson's tone never wavered once. He remained calm and steady. Every single American should be able to answer that instantly, without any excuses or hesitation. He reached for her voting record, her past statements, and her tweets. We are going to revisit this question 6 more times today because I believe your actions tell the story better than your words ever will. Johnson then opened the Bible. Proverbs 17:13. If a man returns evil for good, evil will never leave his house. He looked directly at her. America saved you from a war-torn Somalia and gave you everything. And in return, he didn't even bother finishing the sentence. He didn't have to. Omar sat there frozen, the calculation clearly visible on her face. Because there was simply no good answer to the most basic question in American politics. If she said yes, her own voting record would prove her wrong. If she said no, her political career would be over. If she stayed quiet, everyone would see the truth. The man of faith had asked his question. The ungrateful refugee was left speechless. The House Ethics hearing room felt different on that particular Thursday morning. It was heavier and far more serious. This wasn't the typical political grandstanding for the cameras where witnesses dodge questions with scripted lines. This was real accountability. Speaker Mike Johnson had personally called this hearing, using the full power of his office to ensure it was public, transparent, and conducted under oath with real consequences. The gallery was already overflowing an hour before the scheduled start time. Security was forced to turn people away at the door. Those lucky enough to get inside waited in a strange, heavy silence. In the front row on the left were 9 families who had lost loved ones on September 11, 2001. These men and women were now in their 50s and 60s. Some wore shirts featuring photos of the ones they'd lost. Firefighters, office staff, and flight attendants, the faces of the fallen staring right at Omar. In the front row on the right sat 3 elderly Holocaust survivors, frail but clearly fierce in spirit. The numbers tattooed on their forearms were still visible despite the decades that had passed. They had come to bear witness. Once again. In the second row was a group of 20 Somali Americans, all wearing American flag pins to show that Omar didn't represent their community. They believed that gratitude, not grievance, defined the refugees who found safety in America. The media section was packed with every major network and the international press. This was no ordinary day on Capitol Hill. This was a moment for the history books. Mike Johnson walked in at exactly 9 o'clock a.m. He had no entourage or handlers, just him, his Bible, his copy of the Constitution, and a single thin folder. At 53, he looked even younger, sharp, professional, and the kind of man you'd trust with your legal affairs or family counsel. His 20 years as a constitutional lawyer were evident in his precise and principled manner, but it was his deep faith that truly defined him. As a devout Southern Baptist, he was the kind of Christian who actually studied Scripture and let those values guide his every move, rather than just putting on a show. It was a real faith, the kind that actually carries a cost. He'd been Speaker for just over 2 years, having been the youngest person elected to the role in modern times. While some had doubted his experience, he'd proven them wrong through steady leadership and a commitment to constitutional principles, even when it was politically difficult. Today, however, would test him in a completely different way. Omar entered 5 minutes later. Her designer outfit looked incredibly expensive. Her hijab was a perfect match. Her television makeup had been professionally applied. She had 3 young staffers with her who were all glued to their phones. She smiled for the cameras and waved to her supporters in the gallery, acting completely confident. But you could see a different story in her eyes. There was uncertainty and worry, like she knew today wouldn't be like any other hearing. The Ethics Committee chairman called the hearing to order, read the standard opening, and reminded everyone this was official business, where perjury carries real weight. Then he handed the floor over to the speaker. Johnson stood up and opened his Bible without even looking down. He knew the passage completely by heart. Proverbs 17:13. His Louisiana accent was subtle, but there, which seemed to soften his harshest words. Whoever returns evil for good, evil will never leave his house. He let those words sink in for a second before turning to Omar. Congresswoman Omar, you arrived in America as a 12-year-old refugee. 95. Your family was running from the civil war in Somalia. Is that right? Yes, Mr. Speaker, she replied carefully. Omar's voice sounded very guarded. Somalia was facing state collapse, civil war, famine, and extreme violence. Your family sought refuge in Kenya first before coming to America. And America welcomed you. It took you in, yes. It gave you safety, a home, food and education, health care, citizenship, and the chance to build a life far from war and hunger. Omar just nodded, clearly wary of where he was going with this. And now, 30 years later, you hold one of the highest positions our nation offers. You're a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, a voice for the people in our national government. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had. Johnson held up a hand gently, not to be aggressive, but just to show he wasn't finished yet. Congresswoman, I'm going to ask you 7 questions today. Some will be complex, and some will be simple. But I want to start with the easiest one. The one every American should be able to answer in a heartbeat. He picked up the Constitution and held it high for the cameras. You swore an oath on this document to support and defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. You took that oath, didn't you? Yes. Good. Because that oath requires something fundamental, something that should be true for everyone serving in Congress who represents the American people. Johnson's voice stayed calm, but it carried real weight now. Moral authority. It requires a love for this country. Not a blind love, but a genuine one. The kind of love that wants America to thrive, that celebrates her virtues while working to fix her flaws. The kind of love that honors the sacrifices of those who built this nation and defends those who protect it. He set the Constitution down and looked her right in the eye. So, let me ask you straight, Congresswoman Omar, for the first time today, but definitely not the last. Do you love America? The entire room went completely silent. Omar opened her mouth, hesitated, and then started to speak. Of course, I represent the people of Minnesota. That's not what I asked. Johnson's interruption was soft, but firm. I didn't ask who you represent. I asked if you love America. It's a simple yes or no question. Is it really that much more complicated? Johnson looked genuinely baffled. He wasn't being hostile, just puzzled. I love America. Every person in this room loves America. They can say it clearly. Why can't you? Omar tried a different tactic. As a member of Congress, my role is to serve. Congresswoman, Johnson's voice was patient, like a teacher with a student who keeps dodging the point. Yes or no? Do you love America? The silence dragged on. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then Omar finally said, "My record speaks for itself." It certainly does. Johnson gave a slow nod. And we are going to look closely at that record today. Every vote, every statement, and every action, because you're right. Your record does speak for itself. He picked up the thin folder and opened it. But we'll come back to that question 6 more times before we're finished, because I think by the end of this hearing, everyone watching will see exactly why you can't answer it. Johnson looked at the committee members, then at the gallery, the 9/11 families, the Holocaust survivors, and the Somali Americans. This hearing is about accountability, not politics or religious differences. It's about accountability to the oath Congresswoman Omar took. It's about accountability to the Constitution she promised to defend. It's about accountability to the American people who gave her everything she has. His voice took on a sad tone. I take no pleasure in this. I wish this weren't necessary. But when a member of Congress repeatedly shows contempt for this nation, it becomes our duty to ask the hard questions. He looked back at Omar. So, let's begin. We'll begin by looking at your history regarding religious freedom. Then we'll dive into what you've said about Jewish Americans. After that, we'll talk about 9/11. We'll follow that with your personal behavior. Then, your record in the voting booth. Throughout this whole process, we're going to keep circling back to that one simple question. Johnson's expression was serious and determined because at the end of the day, that's what this is really about. It's about whether a person serving in Congress actually loves the nation they are supposed to serve. The unthankful refugee shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The faithful believer opened up his folder as the truth was finally about to come to light. Johnson pulled out a single page of paper. It was her voting record on laws concerning religious freedom. Congresswoman Omar, you portray yourself as a deeply religious Muslim. You display your faith for everyone to see. You talk about it all the time. Is that an accurate description? Accurate? Yes, my faith means a lot to me. I can respect that. Johnson's voice sounded sincere. I'm a Southern Baptist Christian myself. My beliefs are the foundation for everything I do. I truly believe in religious freedom. The First Amendment is there to protect it. The right to worship, however your conscience leads you. The freedom to live your life based on your religious values. Do you agree with that? Certainly. Religious freedom is a basic human right. In that case, help me make sense of this. Johnson held up the voting record so the camera could see it clearly. Over the past 6 years, you have voted against religious freedom bills 17 times. 17. He began to read through the list. You voted against the First Amendment Defense Act. You voted against shielding religious groups from being forced to go against what they believe. You voted against letting religious adoption agencies work in a way that matches their conscience. You voted against protecting religious schools from the government stepping in too far. Omar attempted to cut him off. Johnson just kept going in a calm voice. You voted to make Christian bakers create cakes for events that conflict with their faith, to force religious hospitals to carry out medical procedures that their religion strictly prohibits, to demand that religious charities hire individuals whose way of life goes against their core religious values. He set the list down. As a Muslim woman who openly practices her faith and expects respect for Islamic values, how do you handle this? How can you justify voting to limit the religious freedom of Christians? Those votes were intended to stop discrimination. Really? Johnson's voice remained steady. Or was it actually about forcing people to betray their most sacred beliefs? Because those are two very different things. He reached for his Bible. I assume the Quran, much like the Bible, teaches tolerance, respect for believers, and the right to live by one's own conscience. Omar gave a tired nod. So, when you vote to make Christians go against their conscience, aren't you doing the very thing you'd be outraged about if it happened to Muslims? Omar said nothing. Johnson brought forward his first witness, a man in his 60s named Reverend David Matthews, who leads a church in Omar's own district in Minneapolis. Reverend Matthews, your church runs an adoption agency based on your faith. Is that right? Yes, Mr. Speaker. And over the last 32 years, how many children have you placed in loving homes? 347 children, all of whom found homes and are doing great. And you handle these adoptions according to what you believe about marriage and family, based on biblical principles. Yes, sir. We feel that children thrive best in a home with a married mother and father. Our faith is clear on that, and our experience has proven it to be true. Johnson looked over at Omar. Did Congresswoman Omar's votes have an impact on Reverend Matthews's organization? The Reverend's voice took on a heavy tone. Yes, it did. Her support for laws that restrict religious adoptions almost forced us to close our doors. We were stuck fighting in court and spending money we didn't have on attorneys, all while kids were still waiting for a home. Johnson asked how many children were left without homes because of those legal battles. 43 children over just the last 3 years. That's 43 kids who could have been with loving families, but we were too busy fighting the government to serve them. The Reverend turned his gaze toward Omar. I just don't get it, Congresswoman. You say you value religious freedom. You wear a hijab in Congress as a sign of your faith, yet you vote to prevent me from running my adoption agency according to mine. How is that fair? Omar attempted to explain that she was trying to prevent discrimination against same-sex couples. Johnson cut in softly. Congresswoman, there are plenty of secular and government agencies that will place children in any kind of family setup. Nobody is being denied the opportunity to adopt a child. He leaned in a little bit closer. But Reverend Matthews is serving a community that holds the same beliefs he does. Families who specifically want their children to be raised with biblical values. Why should he be forced to go against his conscience when everyone else already has other options available? Omar had no real answer for that. Johnson opened up a copy of the Constitution. The First Amendment isn't just there to protect your right to wear a hijab, it also protects Reverend Matthew's right to run his adoption agency based on the principles of the Bible. It protects religious liberty for all faiths, not just the ones you happen to favor. He gazed at her with a look that bordered on profound sadness. For the second time today, Congresswoman, do you love America because it was founded on religious freedom for Christians, for Muslims, and for everyone else? However, your voting record suggests that you only support freedom when it applies to your own beliefs. Omar attempted to sidestep the issue. Religious freedom cannot be used as an excuse to discriminate. Living according to your religious principles is not the same thing as discrimination. Johnson's voice remained calm and patient. This is about conscience. This is about faith. It is the very same faith you claim to honor so deeply. He began to organize the voting records in front of him. Do you know what really troubles me, Congresswoman? It is the sheer hypocrisy of it all. You demand that people respect Islamic practices. You invoke your own faith at every possible turn. You claim that any form of criticism against you is simply Islamophobic. Pause. Yet, you vote to place restrictions on Christian religious practices. You support forcing Christians to act in ways that violate their deeply held beliefs. You seem unable to see the obvious contradiction here. Omar had no answer for him. Johnson then called his next witness, a Catholic woman in her 40s who had formerly taught at a parochial school. Mrs. Brennan, you lost your teaching position at a Catholic school. Can you explain to the committee why that happened? The woman spoke with a voice that was steady but tinged with sorrow. I was a teacher for 15 years and loved my students, but my employment ended when I divorced and remarried outside of the Catholic Church. At that point, the school could no longer keep me on as a teacher. It clashed with their spiritual views on the sanctity of marriage, Mr. Johnson. And did you decide to take legal action? No, I didn't, sir. I fully understood the situation. I made a choice to leave the Catholic Church through my own actions. They had every right to stand by what they believe. I eventually found work at a secular school. Everything turned out just fine for me. So you showed respect for their religious liberty, even when it came at a personal cost. Certainly, because that is exactly what religious freedom is all about. They have the right to live and work according to their convictions. I value that right, even if I don't necessarily share every one of their views. Johnson then shifted his attention back to Omar. Mrs. Brennan is a practicing Catholic. She may not have agreed with the school's specific stance, but she fully respected their right to hold those beliefs and operate in accordance with their faith. He lifted the document detailing Omar's voting history for everyone to see. However, you refused to offer them that same level of respect. Instead, you would force them to hire individuals who openly go against their core religious principles. You would force them to make an impossible choice between their spiritual beliefs and their very survival. Johnson's tone grew sharper, yet he remained composed as he waited for a reaction. That is not what true religious freedom looks like, Congresswoman. That is nothing short of religious tyranny, using the weight of the government to coerce people into violating their own consciences. He stood up and declared, I am a Christian. You, on the other hand, are a Muslim. We hold different faiths and adhere to different sets of beliefs. In America, that is perfectly acceptable because our Constitution exists to protect both of us. You are free to wear your hijab. I am free to live my life in accordance with biblical principles. We are both granted the gift of freedom. He looked her straight in the eye. Yet, your voting record implies that you don't truly believe in religious liberty for all. It suggests you only believe in freedom when it concerns your own religion. You seem to believe everyone else should be mandated to follow what you personally think is right. Johnson took his seat once more. And so, for the second time today, I have to ask, do you love America? Because America is defined by religious freedom for every citizen, not just for you. Omar remained seated in absolute silence. There was simply no way for her to provide a satisfactory answer. The Muslims watching from the gallery began to shift in their seats, clearly uneasy. This confrontation was not unfolding in the way they had anticipated. Johnson wasn't launching an assault on the Islamic faith at all. He was actually standing up for religious liberty, hers included, while pointing out how she had stripped that same right away from others. The Democrats on the committee kept their eyes on their notes, finding her voting record impossible to justify. Religious freedom was the very foundation of the country. Yet she had consistently voted against it while claiming to hold it dear for herself. Johnson reached for his Bible and opened it once more. James chapter 2, verse 13. For judgment will be without mercy to anyone who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. He closed the book. You have shown no mercy toward Christians who are simply trying to live out their faith. You have shown no mercy to the adoption agencies that dedicated themselves to helping families. You voted in favor of harsh government enforcement of policies that specifically target religious convictions. His voice now carried a heavy weight of sadness and disappointment. And now you sit there, unable to answer even the most basic question. Do you love America? Because to truly love America is to love the very freedoms it offers, even the ones you don't personally require or agree with. The witness was then allowed to step down. The voting record was formally submitted, leaving the ungrateful refugee with absolutely no defense. Johnson closed the file on the religious freedom votes and opened a fresh section of his notes. His facial expression became even more solemn. Congresswoman Omar, I'd now like to discuss your past remarks regarding Jewish Americans and the State of Israel. He produced a small pile of printed tweets, screenshots, and various video transcripts. Before we examine these in detail, I want to set a specific framework for our discussion. This isn't just my own framework, but a biblical one. He opened the scriptures to Genesis 12:3, where God speaks to Abraham, the patriarch of the Jewish people. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. Johnson looked up from the scripture. I am a Christian man, and I believe with all my heart that the Bible is the true Word of God. The Bible is very clear about how we are meant to treat the Jewish people. They are God's chosen people. We are called to bless them, defend them, and stand firmly by their side. He then held up the Constitution. As a constitutional lawyer, I also understand America's relationship with Israel, our lone democratic ally in the Middle East, our most vital partner against terrorism, and a nation that shares our values of freedom, the rule of law, and human rights. Both documents are on the table now, the Bible and the Constitution. So when I see a member of Congress repeatedly attacking Israel and spreading anti-Semitic tropes, I have to ask, are you violating biblical principles, constitutional duties, or both? He reached for the first tweet. Back in February 2012, you tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." Johnson read the words slowly. Let each word sink in. Hypnotized the world. That is pulled straight from the protocols of the Elders of Zion. The anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews secretly control world governments through mystical powers. He turned his gaze to Omar. As a Muslim, you should know that Islam teaches respect for the people of the book, the Jewish people. The Quran acknowledges them. How do you reconcile your faith with a tweet suggesting that Jews have hypnotized the world? Omar attempted her prepared response. That tweet was taken out of context. What context makes hypnotize the world acceptable? Johnson's voice remained calm but firm. What context turns that into anything other than an ancient anti-Semitic trope? There was no answer. Johnson then called his next witness. An elderly woman rose slowly from the front row, using a cane. She was in her mid-80s, thin and dignified despite her age, and on her left forearm, visible below her sleeve, were numbers in faded blue ink, tattooed decades ago. The room went completely silent. This is Mrs. Sarah Goldstein. She is 87 years old. Mrs. Goldstein, can you tell us where you were born? Poland, Mr. Speaker, she answered. Her voice was accented but clear. Warsaw. And what happened to you during World War II? My family was sent to Auschwitz in 1943. I was 14 years old. Your parents were killed immediately? In the gas chambers. My father, my mother, and my 2 younger brothers. I never saw them again after the selection platform. Her voice didn't waver. She had told this story many times before, but the pain never left. And yet, you survived. By God's grace, I was sent to the labor camp. They tattooed this number on my arm. She showed it to the camera, those faded blue digits that marked her as property of the Nazi death machine. I survived until the liberation in January 1945. American soldiers found me. I weighed only 72 pounds. Johnson's voice was gentle. And you came to America. In 1946. America saved my life twice. First, your soldiers liberated the camps. Second, your country took me in when I had nothing. No family, no home, no country, just a number on my arm. Mrs. Goldstein, you've heard Representative Omar's tweets and statements about Jews and Israel. As a Holocaust survivor, how do those statements make you feel? The elderly woman turned to face Omar, making direct eye contact. Young woman, I survived a genocide that killed 6 million of my people. 6 million. My whole family was murdered because we were Jews, because people believed we were evil, that we controlled the world, and that we hypnotized governments. Her voice grew stronger despite her age. That is the lie that led to the Holocaust. That is the propaganda that made ordinary Germans think killing Jewish children was justified. It taught that Jews were the problem. It claimed that Jews had evil intentions and that Jews needed to be stopped. She held up her arm. The tattooed numbers were facing Omar. And you, a member of the United States Congress, use that same language. Hypnotized the world, evil doings, the same anti-Semitic lies that led to this. The room was absolutely silent. Omar looked at her hands, unable to meet the survivor's eyes. Mrs. Goldstein continued, America gave you everything. It gave you safety after you fled war. It gave you opportunity, and it gave you power. Yet you used that platform to spread the same hatred that killed my family. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't hate you. I pray for you, but I need you to understand that your words have consequences. They give permission to hate Jews. They repeat lies that lead to violence. They dishonor the 6 million who died and the memory of what they endured. Johnson let the moment breathe. There was no need to add anything. The testimony spoke for itself. Finally, he asked gently, Mrs. Goldstein, do you think Representative Omar loves America? The survivor looked at Omar for a long moment. I think she loves the opportunity America gave her, the power, and the platform. But love, real love, means gratitude and respect, not attacking the country that saved you, and not spreading hatred toward people who did nothing to harm you. She gave a sorrowful shake of her head. That isn't what love looks like. That's just exploiting America, while resenting everything she represents. Mrs. Goldstein took her seat with heavy steps. The gravity of her words lingered in the silence. Johnson turned back to his Bible once more, reciting Psalm 122:6, Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you find safety. He fixed his gaze on Omar. The Bible tells us to pray for Jerusalem, stand with Israel, and bless the chosen people of God. But your tweets tell a different story. They carry curses. They are full of hostility. They push old myths about Jewish power and hidden agendas. He pulled out another stack of posts, dated February 2019. You posted about IPAC and why politicians support Israel. It's all about the Benjamin's baby, implying that Jewish wealth is what buys political power. Just another ancient, hateful stereotype. Then, in March 2019, you accused Jewish Congresswoman Nita Lowey of having a dual loyalty to Israel, claiming Jews can't be true Americans if they support the Jewish state. In June 2021, you even put the United States and Israel in the same category as Hamas and the Taliban. You compared a Democratic partner to violent terrorist groups. Johnson gathered the tweets together. The House of Representatives has already censured you twice, passing specific resolutions regarding your anti-Semitic remarks. Even your own party found you impossible to defend. He leaned in close for the third time that day. Do you actually love this country? Because America stands firmly with Israel. America protects Jewish citizens. America has no room for anti-Semitism. Yet, you clearly do. Omar attempted to speak up. Disagreeing with Israel isn't the same as anti-Semitism. You're absolutely right. Johnson gave a sharp nod. Challenging Israeli policy isn't inherently anti-Semitic. But that's not what you were doing. You were trading in hateful tropes. Talk of Jewish money, Jewish trances, and Jewish double loyalty. Those aren't political arguments. Those are classic anti-Semitic lies. He called the next witness to the stand. A young man in his early 20s, a college student wearing a kippah. This is Daniel Abrams from the University of Minnesota, your own constituent, Congresswoman. Daniel, please share your experience with us. The young man's voice stayed calm, but the underlying resentment was clear. Just last year, someone painted a swastika right on my dorm room door. They called me a Zionist pig. They claimed I was part of a plot to buy America with Jewish money, saying I was hypnotizing people, just like you did. He looked directly at Omar. They used your exact words, your own tweets. You gave them the green light to hate me, to threaten me, and to make me scared to show my faith on campus. His voice started to tremble. I'm only 21 years old. I've never caused harm to anyone. My family has called America home for 4 generations. My great-grandfather was a soldier in World War II. My grandfather went to serve in Vietnam. My father works as a high school teacher. He lifted his phone to show a picture of the door defaced with the swastika. But because of your rhetoric, someone now views me as evil. Like I'm part of some conspiracy. Like I'm someone who needs to be taken down. Daniel sat back down. Johnson let the weight of that testimony sink in. Then he lowered his voice. Congresswoman, this kind of hate isn't just an idea. It's a reality. It's seen in this young man who's now afraid to wear his kippah. It's seen in Mrs. Goldstein's lost family. It's seen in the rising number of hate crimes against Jewish Americans every single year. His tone became much harder. And you've played a part in this. Your words, your posts, and your public statements. They've essentially authorized people to hate. They've fueled the spread of lies. They have caused real pain to real people. Johnson stood up. The Bible tells us that we shall know them by their fruits. What exactly have your comments about Jews produced? Only more anti-Semitism, more hatred, and more terror. He looked her over with a sense of pity. I'll ask again, do you love America, Congresswoman? Because this nation protects the Jewish people, supports Israel, and condemns anti-Semitism. But your own history shows you doing the exact opposite. The Democrats on the committee looked visibly uncomfortable. The Jewish members shifted their gaze away. They simply couldn't stand up for anti-Semitism, even coming from one of their own progressive squad members. Republicans watched with a mix of grim satisfaction and genuine sadness. This shouldn't even be happening. A sitting member of Congress should never have to be called out for resenting Jewish people. Omar sat there in total silence. There was no way to defend it. The proof was just too strong. The victims were right there. The damage was plain to see, yet she still couldn't answer that one basic question. The man of faith had made his moral point. The ungrateful refugee had nothing left to say. Johnson's face turned even more grim. He pulled a new set of papers from his folder. This next part was going to cut deeper. It was a shared trauma for everyone old enough to remember that day. Congresswoman Omar, back on March 23, 2019, you delivered a speech at a CARE banquet. Do you remember your words? The look on Omar's face said she knew exactly where he was headed. I have already addressed that comment multiple times. Well, then I'm sure you won't mind going over it once more. For the official record, Johnson hit play on the audio clip. Omar's own voice soon echoed through the chamber. CARE was established after 9/11 because they realized that some people did something, and we were all starting to lose our civil rights. He cut the recording. Some people did something. Johnson repeated those words slowly, letting every single one sink in. 19 terrorists hijacked 4 planes and murdered 2,977 innocent people, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and the brave first responders. His voice remained calm, yet the raw emotion underneath was undeniable. These were ordinary people who kissed their families goodbye that morning, planned their dinners, and looked forward to the lives they had left to live. He let the room go silent. And yet, you described their brutal deaths as, some people did something. Johnson turned his gaze toward the 9/11 families sitting in the front row. Before I continue, I want these families to speak, because what happened to their loved ones wasn't just something. These were real people with names and stories, and families who are still haunted by that grief 24 years later. A man in his 50s stood up, wearing an FDNY shirt with the name Harros on it. That was Nicholas Harros Jr., whose father was killed in the North Tower. Congresswoman. His voice was steady, but you could feel the pain vibrating just beneath the surface. My father's name was Joseph Harros, Sr. He was working on the 101st floor of the North Tower that morning. He was right at his desk when the first plane hit at 8:46 a.m. Harros held up a photograph of his father, smiling in a suit full of life. He didn't die because some people did something. He was murdered by terrorists who invoked their faith while they slaughtered him and nearly 3,000 other Americans. He took a few steps toward Omar. I'm wearing this shirt for a reason today. He pointed directly at his father's name, making sure she saw it. I wanted you to remember that those people have names, faces, and families who had to bury them. His voice finally started to crack. You don't have the right to downplay my father's murder. You don't get to wipe away what those terrorists did. You don't get to shield KR's reputation. You can't protect their image by acting like 9/11 was just a random event. He looked her straight in the eyes. My father was a decent man. He worked hard and loved us, and he was murdered by extremists who used religion to justify a massacre. Harros went silent for a moment. I don't hold you responsible for what they did, but I do hold you responsible for making excuses and speaking for organizations with ties to terror. He took his seat. Johnson allowed the silence to fill the room. Then, another family member rose to her feet. She was a woman in her mid-40s. This was Amanda Davis. Her brother, Mark, was killed on United Flight 175. My brother was only 31 years old. He worked for the Boston Bruins. He absolutely loved hockey. He had so much life left in him. He was just flying to LA for a work trip. Her voice was firm and unwavering. You could tell her years of sorrow had turned into pure resolve. Those terrorists slit the throats of the crew and forced their way into the cockpit. My brother's final moments were filled with absolute terror. It was pure, unadulterated terror. Imagine knowing you're about to die and being completely helpless. She stared directly at Omar. Some people did something. That's how you choose to describe the day my brother was taken from us. The day our entire family was shattered. The day I had to look my mother in the eye and tell her that her son was gone. Amanda's voice grew even more powerful. You came to this country as a refugee. It was my brother's tax dollars that funded the very services that helped you. His hard work helped build this nation. He was a proud American. And this is how you choose to honor him? By downplaying his murder at a gala for a group with terrorist connections? She didn't give her a chance to respond. You aren't fit to represent this country. You don't deserve that seat because Americans don't make light of terrorism. We don't justify mass murder. And we certainly don't defend groups like CARE. Johnson spoke with a gentle tone. Mrs. Davis, for the record, can you clarify CARE's ties to terrorism? CARE was identified as an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation case, which was the biggest terror financing trial in our history. Several of their officials have been convicted or kicked out of the country for Hamas connections. The FBI even stopped working with them because of those very links. She laid out the evidence, FBI reports, court documents, and hard facts. This isn't some theory. It's the documented truth. Yet Representative Omar chose to stand with them, defend them, and minimize 9/11 just to save their reputation. Amanda sat back down. Johnson turned back to Omar. Congresswoman, I'm a man of faith. My Bible tells me to honor those we've lost and to never forget the innocent who were taken from us. He opened his Bible. Ecclesiastes 3:7. A time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak. He looked her in the eye. 9/11 was a time to speak out, to call evil what it is, and to stand with the families of the fallen. His voice grew heavy as he added, "But you chose to stay silent about that evil. You made it sound small. You called it some people doing something, while you campaigned for organizations linked to terror. You stood up for the indefensible." Johnson pulled out even more records. The history of CARE, the ties to terrorists, the FBI breaking off relations. You were fully aware of all this. It was public knowledge, well documented, and impossible to deny. And yet, you chose to align yourself with them anyway. You chose to be a speaker at their event. You chose to downplay 9/11 just to protect their reputation. He stood up for the fourth time that day. "Do you love America, Congresswoman?" There was a sense of pain in his voice now. It wasn't just disappointment. It was genuine hurt. Because real Americans don't minimize 9/11. We don't describe an act of terror as some people did something. We don't stand up for organizations with links to terrorism. We don't put political correctness ahead of honoring our fallen. Omar attempted to give a response. "My statement was focused on civil liberties. Your statement was focused on shielding CARE." Johnson's interruption was steady but not aggressive. "You trivialized the most horrific terrorist attack in American history just to score points for a group with proven terrorist connections." He gestured toward the 9/11 families. "These families lost everything they held dear. Fathers, brothers, mothers, and sons. Yet you can't even show them enough respect to call terrorism by its name, to condemn the sheer evil that murdered their loved ones." Johnson sat back down and opened his Bible. 1 Corinthians 13:6. "Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth." He closed the book. "You took pleasure in making light of evil. You dodged the truth to protect your agenda. That isn't a love for our country. That's a betrayal of it." The room fell into a heavy silence. Democrats had no defense for downplaying 9/11. Republicans watched on with a grim sense of satisfaction. The families wept quietly in their seats, and Omar found herself with nothing to say. No excuse could ever take back "some people did something." No explanation could justify her being a voice for CARE. No words could ever mend the deep hurt she had caused. The ungrateful refugee had insulted America's dead, and the man of faith made sure everyone witnessed it. Johnson finished the section regarding 9/11. His expression made it clear that what came next brought him no pleasure, only necessity. "Congresswoman Omar, let's talk about your personal conduct, specifically the claims of marriage fraud and campaign finance violations." He produced the evidence: marriage certificates, immigration papers, and tax filings. "I want to be clear that I take no joy in discussing your private life, but when that conduct involves potential federal crimes, it becomes a public concern." Omar's lawyer began to stand up. Johnson held up a hand. "I'm not making simple accusations. I am presenting public records and asking for answers. The same questions that reporters and investigators have been asking for years. Questions that you have refused to answer." He began to lay out the timeline. "In 2002, you entered into a cultural marriage with Ahmed Hirsi. You weren't legally married, but you were within the Somali community. The two of you had 2 children together." He placed a document on the table. "Then 2008. You legally married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Both of you list the exact same parents on your official documents: Nur Saeed Elmi and Faduma Abwar Hussein." He added another document. "Then in 2011. You and Elmi bought a home together in Minneapolis while you were still living with Hersey, having more kids with Hersey, and filing joint tax returns with Hersey. The documents continued to pile up. In 2017, you divorced Elmi. 3 years later, you legally married Hersey, the man you'd been with the whole time. Johnson looked up at her. So the question everyone has been asking is, why marry Elmi? What purpose did that marriage actually serve? Unless, of course, it was immigration fraud. Unless Elmi needed legal status, and you provided it through a fraudulent marriage. Omar read from her prepared response. These allegations have been thoroughly debunked. They haven't been debunked at all. Johnson's voice remained patient but firm. Multiple investigations are still wide open. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found that you violated the law. The FBI still hasn't closed its file on this. Your own attorney even refused to confirm or deny your relationship to Elmi. He held up news articles, investigative reports, and court records. That isn't debunking. That is deflection. And there's a major difference between the two. Johnson then called a witness forward. A woman stood up from the gallery. She had Somali features and wore traditional dress with a prominent American flag pin. Her name was Faduma Hassan. Mrs. Hassan, you came to America as a refugee, correct? That's right. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I arrived from Somalia in 1998. How long did it take for you to receive refugee status? It took 6 years. I applied back in 1992. I waited in Kenya and was finally approved in 1998. And you came here legally, through the proper channels? Yes, sir. I followed every single rule, turned in every paper, waited my turn, and became a citizen in 2004 with great pride. Mrs. Hassan, what is your take on the claims that Representative Omar may have committed marriage fraud? Faduma's voice was steady and full of passion. It shames all of us. Every one of us in the Somali American community who came here legally, who waited, who followed the law, and who loved this country. She turned to look directly at Omar. You make people think all Somalis are frauds, ungrateful, and criminals. But we are not like you. Most of us truly love America. Every single day, we feel so lucky for the opportunities this nation provided us. We're hard workers. We follow the law. We do our part. Her voice grew more powerful. You're a disgrace to us. You make life tougher for every Somali immigrant because people look at you and assume we're all just like that. But we aren't. But we truly love this land. We cherish what America has given us. We don't resort to fraud. We don't break our sacred promises. We don't turn on the country that rescued us. She turned her gaze toward Johnson. Whether she really married her brother or not, I know she doesn't speak for our people. We are better than what she shows. We are thankful. We are Americans. Faduma took her seat. The other Somali Americans in the gallery gave a solemn nod. A wave of silent approval filled the room. Johnson turned his focus back to Omar. Congresswoman, both Islam and Christianity hold honesty as a core virtue. The Quran is clear in its condemnation of fraud. The Bible is just as firm against lying. And yet, you face credible accusations of doing both. He produced a set of campaign finance records. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board looked into your spending and found that you used $3,500 of donor money for personal travel with Tim Minett. He is your political consultant, the man you were involved with while still married. He held the documents up for the camera. You didn't even try to fight the findings. You simply paid the fine. You just moved on. It's as if campaign finance violations are nothing more than parking tickets to you, rather than serious legal offenses. Johnson's tone took on a sharper edge. You cheated the donors who gave you money, expecting it would be used to support your campaign. You broke the very laws that govern campaign spending. You acted with total contempt for the rules that everyone else has to follow. He stared her right in the eye. Then there's the feeding our future scandal. This happened in your own community, right in your district. A total of $250 million was stolen from programs meant to feed children. 75 people have been charged, and the majority of them are Somali. This stands as the single largest pandemic fraud case in the history of our country. The evidence is all right here. The indictments, the reports, and the victims. When you were asked about this massive theft in your own backyard, you just made excuses, claiming the programs were set up too fast, blaming the system, and standing up for the fraudsters. Johnson sounded completely stunned. $4 billion was stolen from children who needed food, and you actually defended it. Let me ask you a question, Congresswoman. When 9/11 happened, what was the very first thing you worried about? Omar looked puzzled by the query. Johnson didn't wait. He answered for her. Your own statement claimed that everyone was starting to lose their grip on civil liberties, specifically Muslim civil liberties. That was your priority right after Islamic terrorists slaughtered 3,000 Americans. You focused on Muslim civil liberties. He pointed toward the pile of fraud documents. But when people in your own community steal $4 billion from kids, how do you respond? You stand by them. You offer up excuses. You blame the system. His voice was now thick with a controlled but palpable anger. Islamic terrorists murder American citizens. You worry about Muslim civil liberties. When Muslims commit massive fraud, you provide excuses. But when Christians seek religious freedom, you cast your vote against them. When Israel acts to defend itself, you launch an attack. When America needs your backing, you vote against us every time. Johnson leaned in closer. Do you see the pattern here, Congresswoman? You shield your community even when they're in the wrong. Yet, you strike out at America despite the fact that we gave you a second chance. He took his seat for the 5th time that day. I have to ask, do you even love this country? His voice was heavy with disappointment, because true love involves honesty, integrity, and following the laws of the land. But your history is nothing but fraud, legal violations, excuses, and attacks on the nation that provided you with everything you have. Omar sat there in silence. The files were public, the crimes were confirmed, and the excuses had finally run dry. Johnson reached for his Bible one last time. He turned to Proverbs 11:1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights are his delight. He shut the book. You have been dishonest with your donors, the public, your oath of office, and this entire nation. The man of faith had proven the fraud. The ungrateful refugee was left with no defense. Johnson then picked up the final, thickest folder. It contained years of voting records, all documented and all devastating. Congresswoman Omar, let's take a look at how you voted on matters of American security and national interest. He pulled out a document. It was a long, exhaustive list. In your 7 years in office, you've voted against American interests so often that people are starting to wonder if you're representing Minnesota or someone else entirely. He began to read through it. You voted against condemning BDS, a movement specifically designed to cripple Israel's economy. You voted present on the recognition of the Armenian genocide. You wouldn't even acknowledge the murder of 1.5 million Christians because you were afraid of offending Turkey. You stood against sanctions on Iran. That's the same Islamic republic that chants "Death to America" every single day. It's a regime that funds terrorism, took Americans hostage, and is responsible for the deaths of our soldiers. You voted against funding the Iron Dome, which is a defensive system that shields Israeli civilians from terrorist rockets. You stood against the very measures that save children from Hamas. The tally went on and on, showing vote after vote cast against America's interests and allies, opposing everything from police support and border security to military funding and anti-terror initiatives. Johnson finally raised his eyes. Whenever American interests clash with your progressive views, you always choose the ideology. Every time Israel calls for support, you stand in opposition. Whenever there's a clear choice between this country and its adversaries, you pick the side of the enemy. He then called his last witness to the stand. He was a man in his early 50s wearing an army uniform, his combat infantry badge on display, and a prosthetic leg that was impossible to miss. His name was Jim Calhoun, a veteran of the Iraq War. Colonel Calhoun, can you tell us where you lost your leg? Fallujah, Iraq, back in 2004. An IED ripped through our convoy. And yet, you kept serving after that incident. I did, sir. 22 years in total. I just retired last year. What's your take on Representative Omar's track record regarding national defense and fighting terrorism? The veteran spoke with a steady, powerful voice, regardless of the heavy price he'd paid. Mr. Speaker, I lost my leg battling Islamic extremists, terrorists determined to tear down America and every value we hold dear. I saw my friends die, honorable men and fellow Americans who truly believed in what we were doing. He fixed his gaze on Omar. You consistently vote against every single effort to combat terror. Back our troops. Protect our allies. Or keep this nation secure. You vote against the very interests I fought for and the values I literally bled for. His tone sharpened with intensity. You hold a seat in Congress because people like me fought for your freedom and your right to be in that room. Yet you repay that sacrifice by voting against everything we stood for. Calhoun pointed down at his artificial leg. I gave this up for America. What have you ever given? What have you ever sacrificed? Aside from your loyalty, it would seem. He took his seat. Johnson let the weight of that testimony hang in the air. Then he turned his attention back to Omar once again. Congresswoman, I'm going to pivot to a different question now. It's not about whether you love this country, but about what you actually believe. He produced a collection of her own quotes, public statements, and interviews. Back in June of 2021, you drew a comparison between the United States and Israel, and groups like Hamas and the Taliban. That is a direct quote. We have witnessed unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. He recited the words with deliberate slowness. You equated America to the Taliban, a terrorist regime that brutalizes women, executes gay people, demolishes schools, and has enslaved a whole population. You could hear the genuine pain in Johnson's voice. Now that you've compared America, the very nation that saved you, to the Taliban, you claim you don't understand why your loyalty is being questioned. He stood tall and said, I am a Christian and a constitutional lawyer. I've dedicated my life to studying this nation's founding, its principles, and its history. And I can tell you for a fact that America is not perfect. We have made our share of mistakes. We have failed to live up to our own ideals at times. His voice began to rise with conviction. But we are absolutely not the Taliban. We are not Hamas. We don't execute people just for being gay. We don't subject women to systematic oppression. We don't tear down the education system. We do not keep our own citizens in chains. He looked her in the eye with a look that almost resembled pity. This is the nation that gave you your freedom, rescued you from true tyranny, and offered you every possible opportunity. Yet, you compare us to terrorists. Johnson started stacking his papers together. For the 6th time today, Congresswoman, do you love America? He didn't even pause for a response. Because your voting record says no, your public statements say no, your comparisons say no, and your overall history says no. The only thing pointing to a yes is your own empty claim. But we all know that actions speak much louder than words. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly thick. The Democrats in the room looked visibly uncomfortable. They had no defense for equating America with the Taliban. They couldn't find a way to justify her record. They couldn't talk their way out of 7 years of anti-American stances. Members of the squad had begun to slip out quietly. AOC was already gone. Tlaib had left too. Presley was busy tweeting about general accountability rather than standing up for Omar. The Progressive Alliance was literally falling apart right then and there. Even Nancy Pelosi's office had put out a formal statement. It was both cold and calculated. The statements of certain members do not align with the values of the Democratic caucus. The message was clear. You're on your own. Jewish Democrats refused to even glance in Omar's direction. Jerry Nadler stayed focused on his notes. Adam Schiff kept busy checking his phone. Debbie Wasserman Schultz just shook her head in disappointment. The ungrateful refugee found herself completely isolated, and the man of faith was ready to deliver his final closing argument. Johnson stood up one last time, stepped around the podium, and took center stage with the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other. Congresswoman Omar, we have been at this for 4 hours now. I have asked the same question 6 times, and not once have you given me an answer. His voice sounded steady, yet heavy with sadness and disappointment. I've laid out the evidence of your anti-Semitism, your downplaying of 9/11, your alleged fraud, your anti-American voting history, and your comparison of this country to terrorists. And after all of that, one single question remains. I will search for any text or script files in the current directory and its subdirectories that might contain the content to be rewritten. Determining the path forward. I'm now determining the most efficient path forward. I'm focusing on finding the script mentioned in the user's instructions. I'm checking the logs folder, specifically log 202260208007.txt, to see if it contains any clues about the missing script. My main priority is fulfilling the user's request while adhering to the 1.1 mapping constraint. I will search for any script-related files in the current directory and its subdirectories to identify the text that needs to be rewritten. Adjusting the search strategy. I'm now adjusting my search strategy to avoid the locked WebView2 directory. I'll focus my search on the Assets folder and the root directory, while excluding the problematic desktop app.winformsxc WebView2 folder. Additionally, I'll examine the most recent log file to see if it contains the script I need to rewrite. I will search for script in the root and assets directories, excluding the desktop app.winforms.xc WebView2 folder, and read the latest log file. I'll list the files in the assets directory to see if there's a script or text file that needs rewriting.